you, Eric, being an educator in the field and putting out the content, like a lot of the things that we do as coaches here at 3D Muscle Journeys because of the work that you do. But I also know there's other educators out there and coaches out there that it's kind of a different school of thought. It's the hardcore. You got to optimize everything, and I've had athletes that have come to me from other communities where they're like super stressed or just high anxiety because of that optimization, like I kind of touched on earlier in the podcast, where their protocols, like the meal timing has to be very specific, the macronutrient distribution has to be super specific, the training, like everything has to be timed and just to the T. Otherwise, you're not going to optimize your progress, and therefore you're, like what you've been talking about, you're missing out. So I think for you, like as an educator, I know like when you're like educating the masses, you're very flexible with the approach. There's a lot of principle based around there. You give people a lot of options, whereas some of the other communities, it's not the case. So as a coach, it's hard to get someone out of that mentality. So if they're already, in a sense, they already like self-imposed anxiety and stress, and then they coming from that type of schooling, it's reinforced, and then it's hard to undo that. So that right there, like as a coach personally, that's where it kind of comes into, okay, how do I keep this person progressing the way I want them to, but doing it in a way where it's a lot more flexible and it's sustainable. And oftentimes, we've talked about this in the past, 3D Muscle Journey can be perceived as quote unquote soft because we're not like with each specific athlete trying to be as optimal as possible according to X, Y, and Z. It's more like we're trying to be optimal at the same time, trying to create a healthy and sustainable approach. Because for me, I think of the longevity aspects, especially understanding now at the age of almost 50 that progress can be had for decades, not this, like, I don't like to look at things in a short time span. Like it's proven with natural bodybuilding, you can keep progressing, into your 50s. So that's kind of like what I like to try to project to people is that there's kind of there's always context around when to be super optimal and cross the T's and dot the I's, but also times where you have to let off the gas so you can be in a much more relaxed state. But it's getting that person who's always trying to be optimal to that relaxed state and to actually embrace it and to be okay with it. And that's some of the things that I work on as a coach with some athletes. And I always kind of think about, okay, I always start like, okay, what's the goal? Like, let's revisit the goal. What's the why? What's the purpose? And then let's revisit that, because that can change once people go through different experiences in different contexts. So from that point, it's like, okay, let me work backwards. Okay, now the why and the goal might have changed. Now the approach needs to be more appropriate to the new why or to the new goal. And what I've learned from personal experience, also with working with lots of athletes, goals change, context change, things evolve over time. So I think, as a coach and like looking at maybe some other coaches out there that are in that I got to optimize everything mentality, like I think you have to be very open-minded to like the things that we've been talking about. So I think it starts like as educators, as coaches, that the way we kind of project things, I think is pretty important. And what I'm seeing from the bodybuilding community now that social media is huge, there's shit tons of podcasts out there, there's information just being thrown out there constantly, that it's easy to get caught up in certain circles. And so my advice to people that are maybe listening to what I'm saying, it's a kind of a long rant and ramble, but to actually listen to different communities, different podcasts, because there's probably multiple perspectives that you can probably, use some pieces here and there to kind of find your own path. So as an educator, Eric, long-winded, but I know you do a good job of that. But how do you go about that? Like how as far as your approach to that, And what do you see with other people that are putting content out there? Like, what do you see that maybe is issues that could maybe be resolved or improved upon?
That's such a good question, Jeff, because I mean, this was something I had to change within myself many years ago. You knew what it was like when you met me. You didn't dub me the relaxed, flexible mindset guy. You dubbed me the relentless warrior when I started because I had a stack of rice cakes and
You were the
microwave chicken
guy
breasts.
backstage that was you and Adam, Alberto were all staring at the clock. We got to eat this rice cake with this jelly or whatever it was, and I have to eat this at a specific time. And you guys were clock watching. I was like, holy crap, these guys are like, they're optimizing, that's for sure.
Yep.
You're optimized.
I, I directly resemble exactly who you're talking about. The person who um, always tried to optimize everything, and that is something like the outwork mentality. The all that stuff is a huge part of. I would still say who I am, because I think trying to go against that mentality doesn't succeed with people. It didn't succeed with me. What I needed to do was broaden my scope of what optimal means and consider, like you said, what are my goals? And my goals were to be able to bodybuild on my own terms for my whole life. And I realized that what I was doing is not sustainable. So, like, if you were to go to my Instagram right now, I have like a little like mission statement of what I see my role with Team 3DMJ, and it's supporting lifters' careers with evidence-based methods. Now, if you don't think about that and you just kind of read it, it's like, oh, he's a science guy. But careers is the actual most important piece of that sentence, because almost all of the times where people come to me with that very reductionist view of optimize everything, and like you said, they come to you and they're stressed out. It's very easy to point out that being stressed out is not optimal, right?
Yeah, the
And if
thing I
it,
say is like, if your approach is causing more stress in your life, then the approach needs to change.
Absolutely, right? So I think anytime I get into these debates with people, I always acknowledge, like, we want to do everything in our power to be as best as possible. And they go, sweet, so I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, does that result in, stress, anxiety, lost sleep, a lack of confidence in what you're doing, take away from enjoyment? And they can try to go the route of, I'm a machine, I don't care about any of that, but they're just not. And we have data upon data upon data when we look at this stuff that all of those things impact you. And I think that's what really drove me towards being interested in autoregulation, because I started to see the role of all these things and how they all collectively go into the big pot of outcome. So for me, when I talk to these people, and how I talk to myself, was looking at it through the frame of, how do I optimize my bodybuilding career? And that may mean that as I habituate to a new lifestyle and as I figure out what works within, like you would say, my context, I like to say like my constraints and what my goals are and my lifestyle, that I look for more opportunities to optimize. Like every year, I could probably tell you something I am doing that I think will improve my ability to be a competitive bodybuilder. I would say I obsessively optimize, but I also don't do it in a way, I don't view it from that reductionist kind of like single dimension view of before of, all right, in this meal, how do I optimize it? Like, that's just not the
Right.
way the world works, you know? So a lot of the times I'm just trying to take the blinders off of my athletes and get them to look more holistically and ask them, well, do you want to be competing in 3 seasons? Okay, yeah. Like, would you prefer to do, 1% better this year and never compete again or burn out, or to work on building on something each year and getting better and better and better and better? And like, ultimately, when you go down that really really hardcore reductionist optimize everything mentality, you find yourself on the other side of science. Like those same arguments have been used to say you shouldn't be deloading, you should be dieting harder, you should be restricting your calories, but wouldn't oats be better in this scenario? And then ultimately you look at these selections, these bodybuilders, and they have like micronutrient deficiencies, you know, or higher stress levels, or all these things, poor sleep. And simply put, when you read qualitative research where you interview higher level athletes. They have these very holistic, big picture, integrated lifestyle approaches to where they've made their sport not like the only thing and separated it, like amputated their life, but they've made their life congruent with it. They've made it so it is sustainable.
Are these you're talking about elite athletes, you're saying?
Yeah, there's
So
a
they're advanced, they're more experienced. So would you
100%.
say, so is it a lot of it the experience level is how, because of that experience level, they know how to integrate a lot of things and have a more relaxed approach because of that?
I think they find that it's necessary. Like one of the things that we see in bodybuilding that we forget is that there's a high degree of survivorship bias, meaning to be a Jeff Alberts, to be, I'll even include myself because I've been in the game a little bit now, like Eric Helms, to be like a Ronnie Coleman, you have to find some way to integrate it all. Like we love to ignore the things that aren't perceived as optimal in some of these champions. Like Ronnie Coleman was a cop in the middle of his career. Do you think that stress levels from that, working shifts, not sleeping well, like he worked within those constraints. He would bring food
Yeah.
to, that situation. Like do we think that you having a family doesn't interfere with what might be on paper perfect bodybuilding? But that's just life. So I think anyone who is in the sport of bodybuilding long term, they settle on something that is sustainable for them. They may make different sacrifices early on, they may have different priorities, but whatever they do, I guarantee you it doesn't feel like they're white knuckling it 24/7 because they would stop. The saying in movies in the military that everyone breaks from torture eventually. Not that bodybuilding is torture, but sometimes it's not that different. And I think that if your approach is something that can only be sustained for a small period of time, that's when people retire. But when they don't really want to, they retire with resent in their heart, and I think that's tragic. So I 100% agree that to get to the experience level of being advanced, you have to figure out a way to make it keep working. And that's often not running on toxic fuel.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I could think back, sorry, I'm going to interject here, but when I look
Go for it.
back to before I met you guys and with my first wife, it was, I'm optimizing bodybuilding to the best of my knowledge at that time. Making sure that I was eating at certain times, eating certain foods, never missed training, hardly ever, got all my cardio in. But yet, because I was optimizing everything within bodybuilding, my life outside of bodybuilding was in shambles. So to me, it was like, yeah, okay, I'm optimizing, but here I am. I'm letting the most important part of my life go to hell. And then when I optimized again, when I was going through my divorce, well, it was because now I didn't have to worry about it because we're going our own ways. And now I got all the time in the world to optimize this bodybuilding thing. Fast forward to when I met my now wife, it was like, oh, I got this new family now. I can't do the same thing I was doing before. I can't optimize bodybuilding 100%. So like you said, okay, here's the new context to be working with. How do I make this work to where I can balance out the best of both worlds? And that took what, 2, 3 goes at it to kind of get close to being where it should be. And it's still a work, in progress. But what I realized over, a couple of preps was that, hey, okay, it's okay if I miss a training session here. It's okay if I maybe skip out on the cardio here. So in a sense, as long as I'm doing 80, 90% of the work, I'm still going to be moving myself forward. I may have to expand the timeline out. Okay, instead of prepping in 30 weeks, I need 40 weeks now because I have to account for the 10 or 20% that I can't be optimal according to X, Y, and Z. But because of that, the stress levels come down, the anxiety comes down, and the end product is better. The physique is better, but also the approach is better. And I'm a happier human. And the people around me, they're not basically upset because I'm pissing them off because I'm an asshole through the whole process.
Jeff, can I interject real quick?
You can
So
say whatever you want.
You're damn
Within
right I
reason.
will.
Within reason. Within reason. Otherwise, it's going to stress me out and get me all anxious.
We're just going to loop right back around.
But let's go back to that point where you were, my first marriage. I tried to do what I did, and among other things, it resulted in divorce. Now I'm going to have started a new family, and I want to try to figure out a way to work my bodybuilding in with my family. I think if you were to take that same situation and apply it to someone less wise, they might think there was two paths: to do what Jeff did and to integrate it with your life, or to go, you know what, I'm going to find a way to make this 100%. And I think that's where a lot of people are, is they're trying to forge ahead and put things in boxes and act as though they are separate. And what I often do is I help them realize that path, that second path that I just described, is actually an illusion. It doesn't exist. It's a path to destruction, because you can pretend that you can separate those things, but you cannot. There is only a path of trying to balance the two things and find a way forward despite that. There is no putting, family or life in a box and bodybuilding in another box. And that by trying to do bodybuilding 100% and ignoring all the duties of your family, like you said, Jeff, it would result in more stress. And like you said, my life in shambles outside of bodybuilding, my life outside of bodybuilding was in shambles. And it is a complete fallacy to think that has no impact on bodybuilding. It's like that meme of the dog, sitting in the room and the room's on fire and it says, this is fine. That's what you're telling yourself, but I guarantee you're still responding as though you're in a room that's on fire.
Yeah.
So I think that is what I often find myself kind of going all the way back to what you said, Amanda, is getting them to acknowledge the reality, getting them to acknowledge these are the constraints. I do have a job. I am married. I cannot be optimal on paper. The only version of optimal that exists is finding the one that results in the best combination of lower stress levels or manageable stress levels, sustainable stress levels, and the best I can do in that situation. Like for example, Mike Toucher, good friend of mine, one of the best powerlifters in the USAPL in the modern era, he just had twins. And his wife is in the military and they have to move every couple of years as they go to a new duty station. He's currently working out like 5 or 6 days a week for like 15 to 20 minutes. So he like today on his Instagram, he posted he did one set of 10 on squats with something ridiculous like 555 pounds because he's Mike T. But he has figured out and everyone would agree, like 5 15-minute workouts a week, not ideal to be a champion powerlifter, right? Like if someone came to me and that was their constraint, I'd be like, really? Like we can't figure out something else? And then they said, well, look, I move every 2 years. COVID's going on and I have new twins and I already had kids before that. I'd go, okay, fair enough. We'll work with 5 15-minute workouts, So, but I think that is the acceptance I have to come to as a coach. But a lot of people come to me and they don't even have that acceptance for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's
like a couple of questions I ask is like when programming somebody is like, how many days can you train per week without it negatively impacting your life? That's one of my programming questions. And it's always a lot of time, like half the times I get as much as you need me to train. And I'm like, no. Let me ask that question again. And then from there, it's like, okay, within those sessions, let's say it's 4 days per week. Okay, within the 4 days, how much time can you train where you're not thinking about, I got X, Y, and Z to get to after this session? Like, I want you to be 100% present within your training. So if it's only a 30-minute window, 60-minute window, whatever the window is, like that's where we're going to that's what we're going to program for. Because that way you're present for your training. You're not thinking about what you have to do outside of the gym. So that way both life harmony is in check, gym harmony is in check, and it's like a circle. It's like a nice balance between the two. Because otherwise, like you said, it's like if your life is kind of like wacky or your gym life is wacky, it's always going to impact the other way.
And Amanda, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but I think a lot of the times, I think especially in bodybuilding where it's just freaking weird, it's not uncommon that people won't really have the conversation about, hey, I really care about this thing I do with their loved ones or the people around them. So they start to just try to, like, let's say best case scenario, but not ideal because they're not actually talking about it. They try to fit in their bodybuilding in the nooks and crannies of life, and they sneak their food scale to things, and they order the right foods when they go out, and they play nice with grandma and have like, like the half bite like 10 times, kind of like when you have the one Corona, you never manage to drink more than like an inch down when you don't want to drink with your buddies. Like all the little behaviors where we try to like pass as a non-bodybuilder, but not be, a dick. The other version of that is like, everyone needs to know I'm on contest prep and I can do no things and I will be a hermit and how dare you eat pizza around me. I don't like, some people will be like, oh, I'd much rather be the first one. And I would go like, yeah, that's, I guess, less selfish. But in reality, if you were to actually figure out a way to optimize your constraints and your loved ones see you making an effort, and even better, if you communicate with them and talk about your needs, they're going to want to meet you halfway. They're going to want to be like, well, hey, like, if you want to train on like Tuesdays, I've got this thing, and we've got the sitter, you could get a full hour long session and you'd be like, oh shit, you're good with that? Like, absolutely. I know how important it is to you to have your training time, because this is a two-way street. Like if you are barely able to do the thing that you love and you're just kind of fitting it in the cracks, and you know that you're not able to apply the level of time, commitment, effort, and thought to the sport that you love, and that's a big part of who you are, anyone who loves you, and I don't mean this to now use as ammunition against them, like, if you love me, you would let me bodybuild more. But I'm saying, like, if they see that in you, you've got a good communicative relationship where there are compromises to be made and rope to be let out, they'll more than likely accommodate because they've seen you do the same thing. So I don't know. I just sometimes I see people not even really consider that pathway because it's just weird to talk about, feel selfish, or they're embarrassed about it, or it's just something that's always been personal for them, and then they now have an interaction with family members that they didn't used to. They never really thought about that possibility.
Yeah, that brought up this thought that there's usually a big lack of trust within the person's self, and then that's reflected in how they interact with others, and so they don't trust the other person to respect what it is that they love and enjoy, and to work with whatever boundary they might have around it. And we could see that lack of trust in program hopping, in switching from, okay, I'm going to bulk, and then wait, this is too much, I'm going to cut. And the difference I noticed, like, between a person that's really advanced and experienced, like you, Eric, and Jeff, is they trusted, you guys trusted the process. You trusted yourselves to make these different changes to broaden this optimal scale, like what that looks like for you. And in doing that and trusting it, that allowed you to work within the boundaries, the constructs of your life. And then that was actually the optimal way to be for your life situation. It was very individual, rather than following some sort of script or like whatever the research says. The way that if we approach that in that way, we can be far more relaxed and we can enjoy what we love more.
Amanda, what you just said made me realize something. Jeff, how many times, or let me put it this way, I can notice a very distinct difference between some of the people who come to work with me or work with you. Some of them are, you're the expert, I came to you because you know your stuff, you tell me what to do, I'll follow it. And others come from a perspective of not arrogance, but like Amanda says, they have in their self-concept that, I'm in charge of my own journey, I know me best because who else could, and I really respect you, I want your input, can you help me achieve my results? And those can look very, very similar if you don't know what to look for, but they're totally different, because that second example is something I see a lot more in highly experienced athletes, advanced lifters, pros who come to us, people who've been around the block for a while, and they don't program hop because they're basically seeing themselves in the driver's seat, as you said, quote unquote, trusting the process and knowing that they're trying to achieve these goals. And they're basically kind of just like window shopping. They're going, oh, what would work for me? Do I want that? No, I'll go with this. Let's see if they can help me out. But that is a fundamentally different self-concept than I don't trust myself. I need a guru. I need science. I need a coach. I need an authoritarian. I need someone to tell me what to do and what is best because I don't actually have self-efficacy. And those are the people who get caught in the slipstream of program hopping, of the new science study that comes out, or whatever the new influencer said on their account. And I've come to realize that a big duty of care of what I do as a science communicator, and even more so when I'm coaching someone, is to try to help them build up their self-efficacy. And these are also the people who are uncomfortable with auto-regulation. Like, I have to rate my own RPE. Like, I have to tell you how things are going. I have to assess. I have to be aware of my own body. Can't you just tell me this stuff? Because I don't trust me. I'm shitty. I can't make progress. I need you to make it for me. And ultimately, they're the ones who get the most payoff from being involved in the process and seeing that they do have insights about themselves and that they can improve their self-efficacy. And they get armed, if you can really help them do that, to be more successful and more independent on their own and more agile and able to deal with these situations and less prone to only having 3 days to work out, but being told by someone or reading a post that says 5 days is optimal and bashing their head against the wall, like we see over and over and over again. So anyway, I was just reflecting on that, Jeff, that distinction is something that I really pay more attention to now than I used to, in kind of the mindset of when someone comes to me to seek my help.
Yeah, I think lately for me, like the last month or two, like some of my Skype consults are lasting up to 2 hours. And it's because I'm asking like tons and tons of questions about their lives, their context. And I'm trying to, as a coach, to come up with ways to quote unquote optimize, not in a stressful way, their environment, like their own individual context versus, hey, I'm trying to optimize you according to whatever the latest research is. If I can use the research, great. If it works for their constraints, like you talk about, then great. But if not, then we need to go to maybe the second best thing, but it ends up being the best thing for you because it just creates a much more serene environment to work from.